The morning light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Meridian Hotel's bridal suite in long, golden streaks, and everything smelled like fresh roses and possibility. My dress was hanging on the back of the closet door, ivory silk charmeuse, hand-fitted 3 times over 4 months, the kind of gown that makes you feel like your whole life has been leading to this exact moment. My best friend and maid of honor was laughing about something behind me, and the woman doing my hair kept saying, "Hold still, just hold still." And I remember thinking, this is it. This is the morning. Everything begins. I was 29 years old. I had a corner office at a marketing firm in downtown Chicago. I had a savings account I'd been building since I was 22, when I graduated without a cent of debt because I'd worked 2 jobs through college and refused to borrow what I couldn't pay back. I had an apartment I loved, a car I owned outright, and a 5-year plan that I was 18 months ahead of. I also had a fiancé named Marcus, who I had met at a rooftop fundraiser 3 years earlier, and fallen for in the particular way that only happens when you're old enough to know better, and still choose to jump anyway. What I didn't have, sitting in that bridal suite at 7:15 in the morning, was any idea that the next 4 hours were going to be the most clarifying of my entire life. Marcus and I had been together for 31 months when he proposed. It wasn't a surprise. We had talked about it the way I talk about everything important, which is carefully, with both parties seated and coffee in hand. We discussed finances. We discussed living arrangements. We discussed what marriage actually meant to each of us beyond the ceremony. I thought I knew who I was marrying. I thought I had been thorough. I had not been thorough enough. His mother, I had always called her by her first name, Diane, at her own insistence, had been perfectly pleasant for most of our relationship. Warm, even. She had a laugh that filled rooms and a way of touching your arm when she spoke to you that felt like being held. His older sister, Renata, was quieter, more watchful. I had always attributed that to personality. I understand now it was something else. The first time I felt something shift was at the engagement dinner, 7 months before the wedding. Marcus's family had taken us to a steakhouse in Naperville, the kind of place with dark leather booths and a wine list that goes on for 6 pages. Renata had asked me, with the particular tone of someone asking a casual question that is not casual at all, whether I planned to keep working after we had children. I said yes, of course. She had smiled, just smiled, and changed the subject. I thought about that smile sometimes in the months that followed, but I always talked myself out of giving it too much weight. People ask uncomfortable questions. It doesn't mean anything. I had purchased our home 14 months before the wedding. It was a 4-bedroom Craftsman in Elmhurst. A big backyard, original hardwood floors, a kitchen that had been recently renovated with quartz countertops and a double oven. The down payment was $220,000. I put in $190,000. Marcus put in $30,000. We had an attorney draw up a cohabitation agreement, something my friend Rachel, who is a real estate lawyer, had pushed me very firmly toward. The agreement specified proportional equity. I had 86.4% ownership interest. Marcus had the rest. It felt like a technicality at the time, the kind of document you file away and never look at again because you're in love and you're not thinking about what happens if things go wrong. Rachel had told me to keep a copy somewhere safe. I kept 3. The wedding was scheduled for 11 o'clock at the Blackstone Estate, 40 minutes from the hotel. My mother had flown in from Portland. My college roommate had driven up from Indianapolis. 67 people had traveled from as far as Seattle and as near as the next suburb to be in that room when Marcus and I made promises to each other. The florist had used 1,200 stems of white ranunculus. I know this because I had approved the invoice. At 8:40 in the morning, there was a knock on the bridal suite door. It was Renata. She came in without being properly invited, the way some people enter rooms like they already own them. She was dressed, fully made up, carrying a small gift bag that she set on the dresser without commenting on it. She looked at me in the mirror for a moment. I was still in the chair, my hair half done. And then she looked at my mother and my maid of honor and said pleasantly that she was hoping to speak with me privately for a few minutes. My mother started to say something. I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. "It's fine," I said. "Give us a few minutes." When they had stepped out, Renata sat down on the edge of the luzi near the window and folded her hands in her lap, and the smile she gave me was the same one from the steakhouse. Patient. Like she'd been waiting for this moment for a while. She told me she wanted to go over something before the ceremony. Not to alarm me, she said, just to make sure we were all on the same page. She said that in their family, and she meant their family, the one I was about to join, there were certain expectations about how things worked, how the household operated. She said that her mother had always managed the finances for the extended family, that it was something the women in the family took on as a kind of sacred trust. She used the word sacred. She said there was also the matter of Sunday dinners, which were non-negotiable and had been the anchor of the family since she and Marcus were children. She said that these dinners required the wives to arrive early to help with preparation and stay late to handle cleanup, because that was how it had always been done. I sat very still in that chair. She kept going. She said their mother had been unwell for the past year, nothing serious, but that she needed additional support, and it had always been understood that when Marcus married, his wife would help carry some of that load. Not a burden, she said. She used the word not a burden specifically. Just a contribution to the family, the way all the other wives contributed. I let her finish. I waited one full beat after she stopped speaking. Then I said, "What specific tasks are we talking about?" She blinked. She hadn't expected that. She said, "Well, the household bookkeeping, grocery coordination, being available on weekdays if mom needs a ride to appointments." I said, "Are these written down anywhere? Is this something Marcus and I discussed and agreed to before today?" The second question was the one that changed her face. She said, and I want to be precise here because I have thought about this sentence many times since. She said, "These aren't things that need to be written down. This is how family works." I thanked her for letting me know. I told her I'd see her at the ceremony. She picked up the gift bag on the way out. I sat in that chair for about 45 seconds after the door closed. My mother came back in first. She looked at my face and didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed once, which was everything. I asked the hairstylist to give me 10 minutes. After everyone stepped out, I called Rachel. Rachel picked up on the second ring. I told her in order exactly what Renata had said. Rachel listened without interrupting, which she is very good at because she is a lawyer, and lawyers know that the facts matter more than your reaction to them. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said, "Have you and Marcus talked about any of this? Any of it at all?" I said no. Another pause. Then she said, "Okay, I'm getting in my car." Rachel lived 22 minutes from the hotel. I called Marcus next. He answered immediately, confused because grooms aren't supposed to talk to their brides on the morning of the wedding, and he knew I knew that. I didn't bother with small talk. I told him his sister had come to see me. I told him what she had said. I told him I needed to know, right now, before I put on that dress, whether he had known about any of this and whether he agreed with it. There was a silence on the phone that was different from Rachel's silence. Rachel's silence was her gathering information. Marcus's silence was something being decided. He said, "My mom has been struggling. Renata was probably just trying to make sure you understood what we were walking into." I said, what we were walking into. "Does that mean you knew?" He said, "Claire, it's our wedding day." I said, "I know what day it is. I need you to answer the question." He said that his family had certain traditions and that he had hoped, once I was officially part of the family, things would naturally fall into place. He said he hadn't brought it up because he didn't want to make it into a bigger deal than it was. He said, "They're not bad people. They just need time to adjust." I said, "Adjust to what, Marcus?" He said, "To Hoff to what, Marcus?" He said, "To having you around. To how independent you are." There it was. How independent you are. There it was. How independent you are. Said not like a compliment. I thanked him. I told him I needed an hour. He started to say something else, but I had already pulled the phone away from my ear. Rachel arrived in 19 minutes, which means she drove faster than she should have. She came in still in her bridesmaid dress, hair only half curled, heels in one hand. She sat across from me at the little table by the window, and I told her everything again. this time including what Marcus had said. Rachel's one of those people who processes information without showing it on their face. She sat very quietly for a moment. Then she opened her bag and took out her phone and pulled up a document, and she slid it across the table to me. It was the cohabitation agreement, the one I had signed 14 months ago. She had brought a copy. She said, "I want to make sure you remember what this says before you make any decisions." I read through it. I knew what it said. I had read it 3 times before signing it. But Rachel was making a point. She was reminding me that I had been careful, that I had protected myself, that there was ground to stand on if I needed it. I looked up at her and said, "What happens to the agreement if we get married today?" She said, "In Illinois, a cohabitation agreement can be superseded by marriage, depending on how the ceremony is documented and whether you sign anything today." I said, "What if we don't get married today?" Rachel looked at me for a very long moment. Then she said, "Then the agreement stands exactly as written. Your equity is protected." I sat with that for a minute. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does on a clear October morning, which is, look so beautiful it almost convinces you everything is going to be fine. I thought about the dress on the closet door. I thought about 1,200 stems of ranunculus. I thought about my mother flying in from Portland and my college roommate driving from Indianapolis and 67 people who had rearranged their weekends to be in a room at 11 o'clock. Then I thought about the silence on Marcus's end of the phone, the specific shape of it, the way he had said how independent you are like it was a problem he'd been quietly filing away. I asked Rachel to step out for 5 more minutes. I called my mother. She came back into the room and I told her, as calmly as I could, what was happening. My mother is not a calm woman by nature. She is expressive and warm and prone to tears at greeting card commercials. But when it matters, she gets very still. She got very still. She listened to every word. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" I told her what I needed. She left the room and I sat alone for the first time that morning. And I thought about a conversation Marcus and I had had about 6 months into dating, lying on the floor of my apartment eating takeout pad thai, talking about what we each wanted from the future. He had said, and I had loved him for saying it at the time, that he admired how self-contained I was, how I didn't need other people to tell me who I was. I had thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. I understand now that what he was actually doing, 6 months in, was measuring the distance between who I was and who his family expected me to become. I took off the earrings I was wearing. I laid them on the vanity. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called the Blackstone Estates event coordinator. Her name was Jenny, and she was extraordinarily professional about everything. By 9:50, my mother had spoken to the families. By 10:15, guests were being redirected to the hotel's restaurant for a brunch that Jenny had somehow arranged in under 30 minutes. The woman deserved a raise. By 10:40, Marcus had called me 11 times, and his mother had called 4 times, and Renata had sent 3 text messages that began, in order, "Claire, what is happening? Please call me." And then nothing more after that. Rachel sat with me in the suite while I changed out of my wedding preparation and into the clothes I had driven to the hotel in the previous evening. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She helped me repack my bag. She handed me a glass of water at exactly the moment I needed it. Marcus came to the hotel at 11:30. I met him in the lobby, not in the suite because I wanted to be somewhere with an exit. He looked not angry. Shattered was the closer word. He sat across from me in one of the lobby chairs and said my name twice before anything else came out. He said he hadn't known Renata was going to come to the suite that morning. He said if he had known, he would have stopped her. He said that he loved me, that he had always loved me, that he had always loved me, that none of this had to mean what I was making it mean. I said, "When were you going to tell me?" He said, "Tell you what?" I said, "That your mother expected me to manage her medical appointments and your family's finances and show up every Sunday to cook and clean. When was that conversation going to happen?" He said, "After the wedding, things would have settled into—" I said, "After the wedding, you mean after the cohabitation agreement was superseded?" He stopped. I watched him understand that I knew exactly what that meant. I watched him try to figure out when and how I had come to know it. He said very quietly, "Rachel, I didn't answer that." He sat back. He put his face in his hands for a moment, then he looked up and he said something that I think he meant to sound like honesty. Something about how he'd always known his family was a lot. How he'd told himself I was strong enough to handle it. How he convinced himself that once I was in the family, everything would work itself out organically. He said, "I thought you'd adapt." I turned that word over a few times. I said, "Marcus, I put $190,000 into that house. I did not do that so that I could adapt." He said, "That money is part of our life together." I said, "The agreement says otherwise." He said, "We can revisit the agreement." I said, "We are not revisiting the agreement." His voice got tighter after that. He said the house was meant to be a family home. He said his parents had contributed, meaning they had contributed in emotional support and had driven out twice to see the progress of renovations, not financially in any way I could document. He said that walking away from the wedding was humiliating for everyone involved and that I was being reckless with something real. I said, "I am not walking away from something real. I am walking away from something that was never what it appeared to be." He called me 3 more times that afternoon. His mother called twice. Renata sent one final message that said, "I hope you understand what you've done to this family." I read it once, set my phone face down, and poured myself the first glass of wine of what had been supposed to be my wedding day. The weeks that followed were not simple because nothing like this ever is. Marcus retained an attorney. His attorney sent a letter suggesting that because we had been cohabitating in the property and Marcus had contributed to mortgage payments over the past 14 months, there was a basis for revisiting the equity arrangement. Rachel read the letter and described it to me using a word I cannot repeat here, but her meaning was clear. She sent a response that cited the cohabitation agreement, the recorded deed, the proportional equity clause, and attached a full accounting of every mortgage payment made over the 14 months, cross-referenced against the direct deposit records from both our bank accounts, showing precisely what each of us had contributed. She also noted, in language that was polite and absolute, that any claim suggesting equitable interest beyond the documented agreement would need to proceed through the courts, and that she was prepared to ensure that process was thorough. The response from Marcus's attorney came back 10 days later. They were not pursuing the claim. "I got the house. I want to be specific about what that means because I think specificity matters in stories like this. I did not get a partial settlement. I did not get a buyout that compensated me for some percentage of what I had put in. The cohabitation agreement held, my equity interest was documented and defensible, and Marcus's name was removed from the deed in a process that took 6 weeks and cost me a filing fee and Rachel's labor, which she refused to invoice me for, which I will owe her for the rest of my life." Marcus moved into an apartment in Wicker Park. His mother, from what I heard through people who still knew both of us, told anyone willing to listen that I had blindsided her son. Renata stopped appearing in the social media feeds of mutual friends within a few months, whether by choice or algorithm I couldn't say. The thing I think about most when I think about that morning is not the dress or the flowers or the 67 guests. It's the phone call with Marcus, the silence before he answered my question. The way a person's silence can tell you everything they've decided not to say out loud. I have thought in my less generous moments about what my life would have looked like if I had gotten dressed that morning and walked down the aisle anyway. I try to imagine it, the Sunday dinners, the medical appointments, the family finances handed over to a woman who had started mapping out my role before she'd even met me properly. I tried to imagine Marcus, year by year, becoming more the person his family expected him to be, and less the person I had fallen for on a rooftop in downtown Chicago. I can't quite see it clearly because I think some part of me even then already knew. My mother flew home to Portland 4 days after the wedding that didn't happen. At the airport, hugging me goodbye, she said something I have written down and kept. The bravest thing a person can do is refuse to become someone smaller than themselves. My mother says things like this sometimes, and they land the way they're supposed to. I kept the house. I kept the career. I kept Rachel. And my mother. And my college roommate who drove 4 hours and didn't complain once. I also kept the habit, which I'd developed in the 14 months of house ownership, of reading every document twice before signing it. Of asking the 2 questions most people skip. Is this written down? And did we agree to this? They are not complicated questions. They are not aggressive questions. But they are the ones that will tell you, faster than almost anything else, whether the person across from you is building something with you or building something around you. The ranunculus were donated to a hospital in the South Loop. I found out later from the florist who sent me a note that I still have in the drawer of my nightstand. 1,200 stems. Someone in a recovery ward that week woke up to white flowers on the windowsill and had no idea what they meant, which is fine. Flowers don't need context to do their work. I wake up most mornings now in the house in Elmhurst, which I have made entirely my own in the 14 months since, and I think about what I want to say to anyone who might hear this story and recognize something in it. I want to say, the moment something feels like it's being built around you rather than with you, trust that feeling. Ask the questions out loud. Do not wait for after the ceremony, after you signed, after things have settled into place. That settling is not something that happens to you. It's something that gets done to you. I want to say, document everything, not because love requires suspicion, but because clarity is a form of respect. For yourself and for the person you're choosing, I want to say, have a Rachel, or be someone else's Rachel. Know a person who will drive 22 minutes without being asked twice, who will bring the right document at the right moment, who will sit quietly with you while you figure out what you actually need. And I want to say this last thing, which is the truest one. Walking away from something that looked like everything is not the same as losing everything. I know that because I did it, and I know what I still have. Most mornings, the light comes through those floor-to-ceiling windows in Elmhurst in long golden streaks, and everything smells like coffee and my own particular life. And I think, this is it. This is where things begin. I was right about that part, just wrong about the morning.